Hey, it's KR with another video that comes out of what I happen to be working at, my homebrew world, which is a catacomb. And so, of course, then I start to think about this and, go into the history and ideas and everything. And then that becomes a video. But it's funny because I've been asked before, hey, KR, how do you come up with these topics? Do you look and see what's getting the most clicks or the views? And clearly not. It's not my concern with videos. I like to get them, but I don't think about that. It's usually just whatever I happen to do. If it's something like, I happened to play Shadow Dark a couple times, did a video on it. It got maybe more than I would usually get, but it was 2 years too late, right? It wasn't the time to do it. So this one is about catacombs because I'm creating this elaborate catacomb system for my home world. So what I did was researched a little bit about what catacombs, their significance in our, mythology and culture, where they came from, to get an idea of how to create them in such a way that they work with an RPG setting. Remember in Game of Thrones where they have the catacomb behind the Keep of the North, and they have some scenes in there that are classic with the various personages of the past. There's their burial thing. It's very evocative with the torches and flames and stuff. And they have catacombs in other places in that book and the TV series. So it has a rich, and again, rich history. The place of the dead in Lord of the Rings, or the caves of the dead, I think they're called, or halls of the, whatever it is. I mean, we've seen this a million times. Catacombs are something because there's dead. There's a famous opening scene in Nosferatu, the Herzog version, where he took down in Mexico, where they have these mummies. And he set them up. He actually took the mummies out of their cases and set them in these caverns to make it look like catacombs. Because, of course, he'd seen them from Europe. There's all sorts of famous catacombs all over Europe. And what the catacombs are, originally, I mean, they've come from different sources. The most famous, the Roman catacombs were, the Romans did cremation. But the early Christians and the Jewish sects and some other ones didn't believe that the body could not be cremated. The Romans didn't want to waste space on these graves, so the people dug into the volcanic soil. It was very easy to dig out tunnels and stuff. And they dug these elaborate tunnel systems with rooms that were sealed and put all these bodies in there. So that's the prototypical catacombs that we think about from our own history. And obviously, then they got bigger. There's a famous one that I'll put here that has an elaborate, I think, chapel and places to live. And there were almost like cities built on the cities of the dead, the people that tended to it and whatnot. That was pretty rare. But clearly, when you could dig out these elaborate complexes, and then they became place for people to hide, and criminals used them, and all sorts of stuff. Then some of them were forgotten and rediscovered, and all kinds of things. And the thing about the catacomb as a place is it's a, kind of a bridge between the living and the dead, and a bridge of memories of those people. You go there and they see their names, or they see their artifacts and how they lived at that time. And there's a living thing. It's almost like the dinosaur tracks, right? That show us how the dinosaur moved through the world. The catacombs provide that as well. And when you think about this for an RPG setting, obviously where you have ghosts that can, linger in the world, you have gods that are very active in terms of, being honored, and their dead being honored, their priests or whatever. Again, who is buried in this catacomb? What was their status in the world? How does that reflected in the magical, divine magic essence of a catacomb? Because just as it is an incredible taboo to bother the dead, to desecrate any kind of cemetery, any kind of corpse or mummy or whatever, that the reasons for that are the connections between this world and the next. And the catacomb serves as that purpose, whether they're mummies in there or just the crumbling dust of people, but they are the skeletons, let's say. That is a very important vessel. You don't mess with it. So this becomes a connecting point of power, a locus loci, I don't know how it is, of power, the divine power that controls, the passage of mortal creatures into the next world. And they don't want you to mess with that. So that's something where there's going to be magic power that will punish those who desecrate a catacomb. So it's a sacred site, and one that you have to be very careful. Raiding a tomb raider, in the world of D&D, that's a risky profession because the gods are watching. and the entities that live there still linger, and they have power. So that force, a magic force, a catacomb is a place that has power to it. And of course, the catacomb serves as a place of an ecosystem that creatures dwell, not necessarily undead or things like that, but just like a dungeon complex where there are, creatures that dwell underground that don't like the light. So they go there, they travel through the catacombs. Maybe they've cleared out an area where they can live. You have creatures, sentient humanoids that like to live in the dark, and all sorts of monsters, all sorts of plant life, fungi and stuff like that. So the catacomb becomes an area where these things live, but unlike, just a standard cavern or an underdark situation, they too may be aware of the sacred nature of this place. They may have areas that they avoid. They may know things about this place. If the players are looking for something or need to go to a specific tomb, a specific area that perhaps has been cursed or something. Because again, the players, they just stumble upon this or they go there to this place. The creatures that live there know about it, right? You have things much more, sentient things that live underground. You have an ecosystem. So you can include that in your catacombs, but make sure it's not just like any other cavern system or dungeon. They're aware that, the ancient nobles were buried in that section of the catacomb, and we don't go there. Or those that were cursed. They were not allowed presence here, but somebody else dug in another area, an area for those cursed people. But we know a way in there, or they were sealed here as punishment. But again, we know a way in because we live here and we dig out areas too. So there's all sorts of ramifications of things, of an ecosystem type relationship to the, sacred or profane area of a catacomb. And you get into the architecture of a catacomb as it relates to the sacred and profane. The entrances to this, there may be a temple or a church or something like that holds all the access points to a catacomb. So that's sort of a working catacomb or under a castle, like in the Game of Thrones thing. But it may also be a forgotten catacomb that's long sealed, or it has a secret entrance that the creatures that live there go in and out, or it's never been opened. The players are the first to get there. And this architecture then reflects what this catacomb is about. So if it's just a catacomb of the rulers of this thing, it's probably just one level, that extends out to a certain thing, but it doesn't go too much beyond the confines of the keep itself. It can be quite large, but still, Or is it a long, centuries and century catacomb where there's different layers? And those layers may reflect, this architecture may reflect the importance of the people that are buried there, the unimportance. Again, as I said, those that have been cursed or, those that have ennobled, and those that are protected with their treasures, right, that they take on to the next world. So this architecture reflects the grandeur of this, whoever was buried there and how many people are buried there, the time period over which it is used, even if it's current, or if it's not, how many thousands of years was it used? And then finally, what's at the deepest part of the catacomb? Because there's always that architecture of the old dungeons, right? I used to have a 12 level dungeon. Down at the bottom were the most deadly things. Didn't make sense why they lived there, but that's how we did it. So what's at the deepest point of a catacomb? It usually is going to be the lich type thing or something powerful, super powerful ghost, or who knows what's down there. Or something has tunneled down there and created their own little world down there beneath the catacomb. Think about that, how protected that would be. If you dug out your whole thing underneath the catacomb, had nothing to do with it. You had one access point that you kept secret. People aren't going to go down there. They're afraid to. Maybe you're protected by all the nasty things that, the undead. I don't know. This is the sort of thing. So the architecture of a catacomb reflects its purpose, the time period over which it was used and built. And also, as a protective barrier, this catacomb is an area where you could hide out and people don't come trying to get you. And another addendum to that architecture is the idea that some of these passages are very narrow. The bodies are literally stacked one on, the skeletons or whatever, the mummies or stuff. And they got winding things and passageways. You have 5 feet or even 3 feet. Why? Because it was dug out. especially the sort of primitive catacomb. The catacombs in the Game of Thrones situation in nobility are big, wide, big areas because that's how they make things. But if this is a sect that buried its dead, it's going to be, very tight, narrow, places. The players may have to move through there in single file. And anytime you're moving through some single file, you can run into some nasty things because the person at the lead, there they are. And then maybe it does open up into a larger area. Again, the tactics that you might want to think about for the players to have an encounter. But when you have something that was dug out, like the original catacombs were, they may dig them out in such a way that just big enough for people to pass through, because it's a lot of work to do that, but also to create choke points and to create secret entrances or to create pits that fall down, all sorts of cool stuff, because somebody dug this out. The other element here is story treasure. I've done videos on this where the information gained in a catacomb gives the players information that is useful to their progress through your world. So they discover this unknown catacomb. Well, who's buried there and why? And why is it unknown? First of all, is there any treasure or anything like that you're stealing from these dead bodies, but, are long dead, so maybe it's no big deal. But, the story there's going to be worth something. They're going to find out something if it's undiscovered that only they know. Or when they go in, that story treasure is there. You've got to go to this catacomb of this ancient kingdom and investigate this or that. Be careful because, it's rumored to be deadly. And then you get to some area and you're going to find out something, some tome or, some item that helps you. And that story treasure comes from the nature of the catacomb itself. It was created to house bodies. It was created to honor some house, or it was created to honor some god or some sect or whatever it is. And that information, that genealogy of that catacomb is worth something. Final thing I'll say about catacombs is, as in real life, they reflect the past. They tell us something about the past. But in a D&D setting, in an RPG setting, those that are in the catacombs can still speak. They have memories that the players can find, not just from writings or from books, but that from the ghosts, the spirits, the undead, the whatever else is in there that's from that period, that's from that time long ago. And again, we used to do a speak with dead where if they were dead for 100 years, they could only say a few words or whatever. But now we're not talking about, you can have that. I'm talking about things that are still haunt the hallways of the catacomb. The undead, the ghosts, the powers, because again, arcane power, how does it manifest itself any way you want, right? So that history is a living history among the dead who still remember that, who still, Aragorn goes and reminds the army of the dead of their oath and what they promised, and this is their chance to escape. It's a classic. So it's about the past, this battle that they betrayed their allies, and about the future and how they can, or the present, they're going to fight, and in the future they're free. And those ghosts are they're not living, but they're existing connections to that past. And it can tie together the world that you've created in terms of its history. That history is what gives your world verisimilitude. So the catacomb is something, it's dark and creepy and dead bodies and undead and all that stuff, but it also represents a period of your world. Maybe it's an ongoing, like I said, the noble house, but even that has a history to it. And the forgotten area, no one's gone through that. That door area was forgotten about, and the players go there and they've got a map or something, and the king didn't even know it was there. I mean, that's the sort of thing you can do with a long history. Things get forgotten. But down inside that place, that history's still alive. And that will give your world, it'll hold the player's interest, verisimilitude, all that great stuff, all based on the concept of the catacomb. And a shout out to my my Patreon this week. I did a thing on an adaptation of a Clark Ashton Smith story. It was really fun. Love to hear how you might use catacombs. If you like the videos, subscribe, like it, all that great stuff. Most importantly, my friends, keep playing an RPG game, whichever one you choose, and tell somebody else about it.